a story of forgiveness. I've held this for the last 10 years. But before I share, I have to paint the picture of the reality I grew up in that led me here. And to make myself clear, I share not to shame anyone involved, but to bring light to a story that has held so much darkness in my life. My family missed the mark, and I grew up in a broken home environment, though that may be an understatement. I won't share every detail, but some experiences in particular do come to mind. One of my earliest memories with my paternal family line was a birthday party my father had planned for me. He rented a hotel space and invited all of my cousins to celebrate. I must have been 8 years old, and we all decided to go down to the swimming pool. I wasn't much taller than the water level at the time, but it was still a space I wanted to brave and maybe even enjoy. But as soon as I did, nothing could have prepared me for what would come next. All of my cousins and the majority of my older siblings encircled me in the pool, their ages ranging between 4 and 8 years older than me. Yes, they were all teens and preteens. And the eldest of the group proceeded to come behind me, grab my head and body, and force me underwater repeatedly. I couldn't breathe. I remember what it felt like to struggle. The sound of water in my ears and air escaping while they laughed and counted. At the time, I had only known this side of my family for 3 years, and this was the cruel impression they left. Such is life. Later that year, my grandfather, my father's father, intercepted me from school one day, disrupting my usual weekend plans to visit my adoptive grandparents. And I only say adoptive because we don't have biological relation. But that's not a thread of my story you could determine by looking at the close relationship I've always had with Pastor and my now late grandfather, Elder Kenny. My biological grandfather dropped me off to his house, and the relatives present in the house proceeded with what they called an intervention. I was 8 years old and encircled again. This time, the adults who were nowhere to be found when I was underwater were all in the same room. They told me, "You treat your non-biological grandparents so well, and you treat us like crap, and you have to do better because we're your real family." They were completely oblivious, but I said nothing in my own defense. And maybe I felt because they were adults that what they said had to be true. Such is life. Another time I was maybe 9 years old, and while unusual for a Saturday, I was at home, whereas I would have normally gone to my adoptive grandparents' home for the weekend. I remember being the only child in the house, which was even more unusual, and I woke up to the sound of shattering glass for the first time. I reached for my then Obama phone with a red background photo, and the time read about 7:20 a.m. I left my room, looked down from the top of the stairs, and saw glass shattered everywhere from my front door. My father and his then girlfriend had gotten into an altercation, but God spared me from seeing the worst of it. My father ended up in the ER with bloodstains on his shirt and glass in his shoulder, but he didn't press charges. That was the first altercation I remember, but it wasn't the last. And the next time, by some standard, was worse. I was startled, but this was my normal, and the Lord protected my mind. I wasn't happy, but I was sane for that incident and the violence that would soon follow. Now this is the story that tipped the scale and left my family wanting. The story I've held all of these years and haven't shared with more than one person at a time, and certainly never with this much detail. I was 13 years old on a seemingly normal summer day 10 years ago at the end of June 2015. I was wearing a blue shirt and orange shorts. I know that's hard to imagine, but it was a different time, and I was in the comfort, so to speak, of my own home. We had a visitor, a cousin of mine just a year older, who had always been known for mischief and poor behavior. He was particularly menacing towards me this day, in a way I hadn't experienced before. He pushed subtle boundaries, trying to test limits without raising too many red flags, yet trying to establish a new norm where physical violations would become acceptable. What happened next, I realized, wasn't random. He had thought it through and intended to plant his flag on territory that wasn't his to take. I didn't get much sleep that night. I tossed and turned a bit, but I couldn't get into a deep sleep. My body was resting, my eyes were closed, but I could still sense my environment. In one moment, I remember an intruder entering my room. Though discreet, I could feel the vibrations of his feet on the floor, even in my rested state. I remember feeling a weight in my bed next to me, and in the next instant, a hand was on top of my shorts, inching closer and closer to a place it shouldn't have been. And in that moment, I came to myself, fully awake, and yelled for him to stop. He was alarmed and jumped out of my bed, but didn't leave my room immediately until my eldest brother came down from the attic and made him leave. My brother was unaware of what had just transpired. And after all of that, I didn't feel traumatized. I mean, it wasn't rape. I didn't feel like I needed therapy or anything. It was just another unfortunate addition to the list of grievances. But the next morning, and in weeks following, I spoke out. I told the adults and even the cousins, the same relatives and even siblings who had encircled me in that pool just 5 years prior. The adults who believed me didn't quite know how to handle it, and one told me, "That happened to me when I was younger, and you just have to move on." But what wounded me the deepest, and I didn't even realize it until recently, was that many of those relatives believed him over me. And I had never given them a reason to question my integrity. The eldest of my cousins in particular, the same one who had submerged me underwater, was viewed as a level-headed, dependable point person in the family. And because of that, I thought surely she would take up for me. But I was wrong. She was driving me somewhere one day and asked me about the incident, then proceeded to tell me confidently, "I don't believe that." I even had another relative laugh as she dismissed it had ever happened. Such is life. Most of you know the story of how Pastor was positioned in my life by the hand of God, and how her influence inspired me to make a vow of chastity, abstinence, and purity at only 7 years old. We later honored that vow in this church with a powerful ceremony and a diamond purity ring that I still wear till this day and will never remove until it's replaced with a wedding band. But I want to make this clear. The abuse, the violation I experienced at 13 didn't end my story of choosing purity. And I thank the Lord the violation didn't go any further. He kept me. I wondered all of these years if it could even be considered as a testimony. I mean, it wasn't rape. It stopped quickly. He didn't retaliate or get violent afterwards. I didn't spend the next 10 years of my life in fear. I always had perfect grades, never gave my father an issue. I kept to myself, never drank, never smoked, abused substances. I had no vices. I still kept myself pure. But if I had really taken a close look, I would have noticed the ways my body cried out in retaliation to the incident. That same year, I remember, I randomly started having excruciatingly painful migraines nearly every day. I had 2 painful cysts that had to be surgically drained. I noticed my speech patterns starting to change involuntarily, and my once nearly perfect vision suddenly wasn't anymore. But I don't know. It could have just been a coincidence, right? I mean, did the symptoms really have to be more severe or malignant for them to be relevant? That's a question I may still have today, but even those I overcame by the blood of the Lamb and the word of my testimony. Nevertheless, it was still unwarranted abuse, no doubt a violation, and an evil seed the enemy planted to destroy. In all of this, I recognize to uncover this story at this appointed time is to reveal the glory of God and his protective covering in my life. Today I declare my own freedom in the court of heaven with the hope that this will also open doors for countless women and men being held captive to be set free by our Lord, Jehovah Rapha, Christ our healer. The incident does not define my life, my identity, or my destiny. I've never been powerless, weak, or defenseless, not back then and certainly not now. And I will never wear the cloak of victimhood. Rather, I much prefer the crown of an overcomer, saved by grace, cloaked in righteousness. But here's the truth that sets everyone free. I never got an apology. Not for many of them. But our God-ordained mandate on the cross to forgive isn't contingent upon the remorse of those who've wronged us. And it certainly does not require us to invite abusive relationships back into our lives. Forgiveness is often a process. You peel back the layers one by one, wound by wound, until the fleshy part of your heart yields compassion for those who've wronged you, even in unimaginable ways. It's rarely completed overnight, but it's a process I've committed to for the last 10 years. I had forgiven them for everything else I didn't mention today, but this incident was the last demon to go, and I've released them. That's my story.